Hi, I'm Andy Ellis. I'm the host of this show and a potential Green Party candidate for governor of Maryland in 2026. I'm using this show to highlight interesting people and ideas that help me and you to understand what is happening and what is possible. You can learn more about the campaign by going to GoGreen2026.com. Guests on this show do not necessarily support my campaign or the Green Party. They've agreed to come on to discuss ideas and issues. And of course, click the subscribe button on YouTube so you can keep up to date with this podcast. Hello and welcome to the show. It's May 23rd. I'm Andy Ellis. I'm the host of this show. And today's show is with Dr. Dr Ball. He's a professor of communication and Africana studies at Morgan State University in Baltimore, Maryland, and he's the author of The Myth and Propaganda of Black Buying Power. He's also the host of the podcast I Mix What I Like, and he can be found at I Mix What I Like on most social media, where his decades of emancipatory journalism, media, writing, and political work can be found also at imixwhatilike.org. If this podcast is about people whose ideas and work influence me and my campaign, Dr. Dr Ball has to be involved. His academic and political work is foundational to the work of this campaign. He ran a Green Party campaign for president that informs a lot of why I think the Green Party needs to be a healthy part of a multi-party democracy, or as Rosa Clemente put it, the Green Party isn't the alternative, it's the imperative. Beyond that, he's created and shaped the political and advocacy space with at least 5 guests we've interviewed in this season, from in-depth interviews with Nnamdi Lumumba about the role of independent Black workers' parties to frequent thoughtful exchanges with Lawrence Grandpre and Dayvon of Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle, to discussions of campus labor organizing with Andrew Eneim, and a regular show with Renee Johnston. Dr. Ball's work is connected and constructive of the politics this campaign is working to build. Besides that, he works at Morgan State University, which is right here in our amazing part of Northeast Baltimore. I'm very excited to welcome Dr. Dr Ball of Morgan State University. Good evening, good afternoon. How are you doing?
I'm as good as could be expected. Thank you for the kind intro. And despite what your intro says, I do support your campaign in the Green Party.
So excellent. You know, I got to throw that in there to to give people the opportunity to do that, and so it's not presumed. But
right. No, So
I want to get right into this because there's a lot to talk about, and you know, I want to dive right into some of the work. And so you're the author of the book, The Myth and Propaganda of Black Buying Power. Can you lay out the basic argument that the book makes?
Sure. The short of it is that for a long time, anyone in any sort of Black organizing media space, anywhere on the political spectrum, by the way, it doesn't even matter, will have heard some version or another that Black people have, as it said today, about $1.8 trillion in buying power. And if Black communities were to spend that more wisely with greater degrees of financial literacy, all the social and material ills of the society could be, if not eradicated entirely, you know, severely reduced. But what is not understood, and it just took me some time to apparently be one of the few, if not the only person to just look at this particular issue for whatever reason, is that it's all emanating from historically really just one source. Now it's about 3, all related to marketing and advertising, and all meant to help corporations target their ad revenue with the concept of buying power that doesn't mean what most people think it means in the way it's reported to them. So the word power in the phrase buying power only means the ability to enrich those who own the economy. It's not a measurement of income. It's not a measurement of wealth. Black people are not sitting on some great sum of money that is only being used foolishly to the detriment of the community. It is not squandering some opportunity. It is what it is buying power is a subset of a broader, I think, counterinsurgency psychological warfare operation to get Black people away from radical organizing. So all groups, every form, really all municipalities, governments, states, and down to corporations, and every segment of society, every age group, every demographic is broken down and targeted by the ad community with this concept of buying power, but it's only when it's targeted to Black people does it become something that is turned into some sort of solution for inequality. No other community has themselves targeted in quite this way. So that's really what I've just tried to do in this small book, is to show the history of the concept and to explain what it is not, which is a lump sum of money that Black people have and squander. It's again a marketing and advertising phrase connected to, as they say in their own literature, estimates and projections. It has nothing to do with the actual material conditions of Black people. So I just wanted to target that myth in the hope that once folks realize what's really going on, whatever solutions we end up coming up with will be more likely to be based on a foundation of logic and reality as opposed to mythology. So that's about it.
As opposed to marketing language used by corporations.
Yeah.
So can you say that you talk about the tracing of it historically? Where does it come from? Where does it start?
So essentially it around the turn of the 20th century, there were these the business and political ruling elite in league with elements of the federal government wanted to really find out how to sort of ease the pressure point at which point labor rebels. So they wanted to find out, basically, because there was all this labor strife and working people after the rise of industrialization, we're realizing, we're making all these products, we're being efficient, the wealthy are getting super rich, we're building all this stuff, and yet workers are not, their conditions aren't improving. So they started to do what most working people do when they realize that: unionize, rebel, strike. So the elite was saying, well, we need to fix this. And one thing that they wanted to do is figure out that pressure point. How do we, I think of it in terms of, when they talk about, I should have written it this way too, but when they talk about the, what is it called when it comes to sugar, how much sugar to put in, the pleasure point or the bliss point. In other words, to get that exact amount of sugar in your sodas and whatever, so that you think it's tasting great, but not too sweet, and and that's what the elite wanted to do with how do we with labor costs and pay. How much can we pay these people so that they will still need to go to work, but have enough to buy the products that are being delivered to the in a consumer-based economy, and not want to rebel. So they developed these cost of living surveys and basically just tried to get we'll pay them this much, we'll give them a raise here, then we'll inflate prices here. We just got to keep, and it's like that. That's basically what, even in their own literature, they said they were doing. So and then longer story short, buying power is a subset of that. And then when connected to the post-Second World War need of the United States to entrench itself as the single superpower and to promote itself to the world, part of what they did with Black people here is to use these buying power cost of living survey to encourage a Black middle class, and particularly a Black commercial press class that wanted that ad revenue. So it became this: you tell us you all have buying power and you just want to be good middle class Americans, and we will give you ad revenue and advertise our products in your media and make you relatively rich. And then the Black press was saying, sure, and we'll report it as if it's buying power. And that if we do better, we can do well in this society, and we'll not encourage our communities to rebel and to, so it became, that's really, and then it got really weaponized under Nixon as a mechanism to get rid of the Black Power movement and its radicalism and its militancy. And then by today, it's become an almost, unfortunately, a largely unquestioned figment of a Black political imagination that has been imposed over decades of propaganda, psychological warfare to convince this community that, hey, You're not poor because of oppression and capital and white supremacy. You're poor because you just are not financially literate.
Yeah.
And now my colleague, just real quick, Erica Brown, I can't wait when she, the co-host of the Brokish podcast, when she finishes her PhD work, what she's doing in terms of the world of financial literacy is sort of a hyper version of what I did with buying power in terms of identifying the font of this nonsense. Mm-hmm. She's really drilling down and showing how ultimately it's all really one scholar is producing this global nonsensical rubric that tells countries and businesses how to convince poor people in their communities that they just need greater degrees of financial literacy and they can catch up, as if people are poor because they don't understand the economy. No, they're poor because that's how the economy needs them to be. I mean, it's not that. So anyway, so it's it's
a form of pathologizing Black impoverishment that comes at the hand of a system that, as you say, needs to keep people that way. And I guess you started to get into this a little bit, but talk a little bit about the impact and the myth of this propaganda, of the impact of this myth and propaganda. How does it affect people? How does it affect political institutions? How does it affect movements?
So what the initial goal, I think, is to convince poor people, Black and particularly Black poor people, that they are poor because of their own failure. And it's to discourage an analysis of the economy and understanding Black people's relationship to the economy. It's to do sort of the basic business of promoting products and getting ads placed. I mean, I'm not trying to deny that there is that even just base level need, but it's connected to a much broader political project. So corporations which have largely shaped the narrative around labor over the last 150 years get to continue to do that. In the process of promoting whatever they're selling, they get to promote that's one of the things that I think is often left out of discussions about what critiques or discussions of capitalism. It's not just an economic, it's this whole social arrangement that requires people to be convinced of sort of accepting their class position. So it's in this case helping that process along too. And then of course, I think the real ultimate goal, some of which is expressed in various ways, particularly through the Nixon administration and some of the counterinsurgency materials that I'm still catching up to, is that the real goal is to keep Black people from rebelling, so that if Black people can take all of the righteous energy and anger at their condition and channel it into starting their own business and mythologies around the circulating Black dollar and entrepreneurialism and Black capitalism, then they're if not never, at least less likely to rebel. They're less likely to organize and create threatening movements, which historically have terrified the ruling elite of this country and beyond. So that's at least in short how I see all of this playing out, and the reasons for it. That it has, again, that very baseline goal of selling products, but it is, again, connected to much more powerful and insidious politics and goals.
Yeah, and I think that part is interesting. Like the marketing, the original marketing strategy seems like it was to sell stuff, right? And then it became part of a political strategy in order to suppress Black movement, to suppress Black internationalism, to do all these things that we know are the threats to that capital system. And who were the sort of, to use this phrase that I hear Paul Gilroy use all the time in these interviews, and he says, who is the sort of balance of forces that help it to become that political force out of this marketing language? How did that happen?
So what in my sort of timeline, I point to the turn of the 20th century with the cost of living surveys, then a sort of a fast forward to right after the Second World War, where you have John H. Johnson and of Ebony magazine who creates this documentary literally called "Selling the Negro," where the phrase "buying power" is, if not used first per se, it's used first in the way that we're commonly hearing it today, and it's actually mouthed. I think his name was Weeks or Meeks, the Secretary of Commerce at the time. It's him saying the Negro earns $15 billion a year. That's their buying power. So he's literally saying buying power is the ability for Black people to spend literally every penny they earn on products they don't own, manufacture, or benefit from in terms of the wealth that's produced. So it's so that documentary, almost minus the intelligence agency and the militarist aspect of it, it sort of gives you the whole piece right there. You have the federal government, you have corporate marketing involvement, and then you have the Black commercial press all in this one piece saying, and the documentary is crazy. I mean, he's saying, Black people pay their bills on time, and we work hard, and we don't, we want to be middle-class citizens, and we want to just, we want to shop. And they have these scenes of, the perfect Black nuclear family and in a middle-class community buying product. And it's saying, we don't want to rebel. We're not a problem. You've won the Second World War. We're here with you. Eventually the Black press goes into that, extends sort of that, the double V campaign of the Second World War: victory against fascism at home and victory for liberation of Black people at the United States. They extend that into a sort of Black capitalist fantasy that the double V campaign, having defeated fascism, we're going to help the American style, the democratic democracy wedded to capitalism as a notion. And if Black people can make it in the United States, the formerly enslaved and Jim Crowed and all, then the world can see that under American style democratic fascism, really, but capitalism, the poors in your country, the downtrodden wherever you are, can come up like them. But then really, then again, that fast forward to the Nixon era, to the with that overt anti-Black power era, to sort of politicize it. And then into the 90s, which is really where it becomes, for my generation, the new thing is when the Selig Center gets involved in Georgia, producing these very well-distributed reports about buying power that, to the untrained eye, or to those who only read the headline and never actually pay for or download or read the reports, it looks like, wow, Black people have, again, all this money. But as the Selig Center admits, they're here to help the Georgia business community target its ad revenue. They're not here to help Black people understand their material conditions.
Right.
Then it just gets plugged back into the Black capitalist logic. And then by the time you enter spaces and talk about, we need alternative movements, economies, parties, that logic is there to take hold and keep people. No. If we just get into STEM, or we set up a business, if we can do this, if we circulate our dollar, support ourselves more, if we're more financially literate. And then again, all of that is walking the community away from, this is our relationship to the economy. This is what the economy actually is. This is what's really going on here. And this is why we need all forms of revolution to change it. That
time period, there's so many things I think that come out of that post-war time period that are so influential to how we look at things right now. Sort of the evolution of the two-party system, the ending of the Black internationalist movement, the beginning of this Black buying power. It seems like all of these pieces are setting the stage for what comes after that. And they're all seeming to normalize everybody into this sort of safe, comfortable capitalism that can not actually interact with the rest of the world, not take up the rest of the world's struggles, but be a beacon for the rest of the world. You too can be like Americans, right?
Look at what's happening right now. You have Kamala Harris, Biden on one side, of course, and then Trump, all addressing themselves to the Black community. In many ways, it feels like, I'm sure it's more than this, but I'm only seeing it almost exclusively on the basis of what either party can promise it can do for Black businesses. Mm-hmm. So it's to a certain extent being effective. That Trump has the right has rebranded, I guess, Trump in some kind of way that without any evidence or demonstrable historical fact behind it, claims to to a certain segment of the Black community that we're going to be good for your business aspirations. So then Kamala Harris just comes back and goes on Earn Your Leisure and is sitting down with these popular Black capitalist podcasters and saying, no. We are gonna, come up with the business plan for you. And to your point, and neither party is obviously interested in doing anything other than promoting that mythology that through some financial literacy and some financial management, Black people can, and some small business loans, and I don't know what else they're going to promise, but yeah.
And it's like, it's almost like as if the goal is not liberation. The goal is, middle class comfort or something like that, right? And I don't know. It's just interesting to see the number of things that were happening at about the same time in the post-war era that are shaping this reality today. And I guess it was because the potential of an alternative path of development coming out of that time was dangerous. And so that potential of an alternative path of development is still dangerous. And so I guess that leads me to say, like, what is the alternative? So if power doesn't come through buying, which I think we can all hopefully agree on, where does power come from? How do we build it? How do we redistribute it? And how do we generate it? That's a big question. But.
Yeah, I always struggle. I never like my answers to this, but what I've wanted to help with this little bit of work around buying power is to get I want the arguments and the goals to change. So I don't know exactly how to get there, but my real point is if the US is a 70% consumer-based economy, if the private wealth that I've seen is in this country is somewhere around $150 trillion, if globally that's about 500 trillion in private personal wealth, if 737 people, it could be said in Forbes magazine recently, are worth $5.5 or whatever trillion by themselves, against 737 people alone, then all I want to say is, again, not to get too much into the Marxist stuff, but Marx, I think, was right. He said, the contradiction here is that capitalism shows that we can produce everything that everybody needs, and now we just need to distribute it better. So I'm saying that's where I want to focus. I don't know exactly, but if in this country alone there's 150 trillion in private wealth, which I do know is made from our consumption, our bill paying, the $20 lattes, the $400 movies if you go with a family, the streaming services, the internet we're paying for, the gas we're buying, all that we're doing, whether we're being frivolous, whether we're being frugal, everything we're doing is generating that wealth, so that it just what power is to me is the ability to define phenomena, have it act in a desired manner. I do like that we do definitely, but to me that means the ability to say, well, we need policy that says, at least initially, before we get to whatever utopian world we're going to develop, if 700 people have $5 trillion, the solution is pretty easy. Redistribute all of that. They don't need all of that. They got all of that from us. We've already created it. So we just need, so then the question becomes, well, how do we get to the policy? Well, let's vote for the lesser of evil, or let's get rid of the fascist in Trump, or let's support the other guy that's supposed to not be a fascist that's enacting genocide. Let's Well, I don't really see those as options. So if electoral politics is to be part of the game, because on the one hand, it's easy for revolutionaries like I want to be to say, I'm not voting. It's silly. It's a waste of time. Well, then, okay, then the list is long for what else has to be done if you don't want to use the vote. But right. What my experience has been is that a lot of people who end up saying the vote is silly, they do end up going and casting votes. It just ends up being for the lesser of evil. So on the one hand, they'll claim I'm a revolutionary, I don't want to use the vote, but I believe overwhelmingly, obviously not more than they don't vote at all, because we know the non-voting community is huge, but many of those people still go. So my point is, if you're going to use the electoral political process at all, we might as well build these alternatives that would actually be likely to give us what we want if they get elected, and where we would even be able to develop the campaigns, the candidates, the platforms ourselves. We don't have to wait for. So that's really, so I just want more people to focus on that pot that's sitting there and stop saying that we need to, why would I need to do better with my 1.8 trillion that's not real, when we know that the 150 trillion is real, or at minimum the 20 trillion in GDP is real. So then then distribute that, whatever it is, just distribute it.
Right. I mean, I think the basic concept is redistribute power and wealth. Right, like it's actually not that hard. It's hard to do it, but what we need to do, and the logistics and the details are worth getting into, and they take people who study it and all of that. But at the end of the day, the answer to that problem is redistribute that wealth and redistribute that power, and it is that simple in a way. It's like we don't have to think of the magical formula to figure it out. We need to figure out how we get people in that direction, and how we move them in that direction, and stop clinging to the myths. Because I think there's this interesting thing that happens, to your point about like people who don't vote, who are revolutionaries, don't vote and end up voting for lesser evil. It is like the least people who would demand constructivist approaches in every other aspect of their activism are demanding like the most pessimistic and nihilist approach in this one, and it is like, and I think it's because we believe that the two-party system is inevitable, that it's unchangeable, that the amount of work necessary to change it is too much. And that may be true. All of those things may be true, but then the answer of, well, then let's vote for the lesser evil, it just doesn't make sense. And we'll get to the political, or to the lesser evil part and the electoral part later, but I look at these folks explaining away like, well, yes, sure, Joe Biden is committing genocide, but he's better on everything else. And it is like, all right, once the argument template has you saying that, like, you should reconsider the argument.
No, exactly. It's like, oh, wait a minute. Aside from the genocide, he's all good. Oh, my bad. No,
it's like, and I get the move. I get the argumentative move to say, yes, we accept that bad thing you say about the Democrats, but Trump will be worse. But when you find yourself saying that about genocide, like, maybe it's time to check whether that argument template actually works,
And I know there's a lot of silly ones, but I can acknowledge there are some logical and even sound, strong arguments for against what I'm going to say, but I still am not convinced. I've still not seen the argument that convinces me, that Trump is, or that Biden is better, or that Trump is worse. I mean, I'm not. It's the way these are, the way people come up with the metrics for measuring this is I remain unconvinced, because if you include genocide or something broad around even just what I'm looking at a little bit is income and wealth levels, just for two quick examples. I mean, the differences are not non-existent, but they're not sufficient to make us, I think, walk away from other options. So that's,
and like, look, I think there are compelling reasons for people to be very afraid of Donald Trump. You know, I am not one of these folks that is like Trump will be better for us type of person. I think they're both bad. I think they're both terrible. And I think the lives of many, many people are drastically affected with either of them in power, but even worse, when we frame our politics to only include, you know, as far right as Donald Trump and as far left as Kamala Harris or something. I think we lose the ability to talk about redistribution and constructive alternatives. Like it's like, how do we have a constructivist approach to politics if that's the only thing we're allowed to talk about? You know, and I don't think we can. I think that's the answer to it. Is It's designed that way. When we talk about things that came out in the 1950s, we have this American Political Science Association report that sort of sets the foundation for the modern two-party system. And one of the reasons was to stop socialism. Another one of the reasons was to stop Black internationalism, right? And it's like they're saying the quiet part explicitly, you know.
Oh, I got to get caught. I need to see that. So can you share that at some point with me? I need to get caught up on that because I've heard you talk about it before and I forgot to ask, but I have not read that myself. I'd like to see that. That's fascinating.
So these type of things where they're trying to secure a productive economy in a post-war world, right? Where they're saying like, look, we need this responsible two-party system so that we don't have radical opinions, so that we don't have these movements that are taking our politics and directing them against the Chamber of Commerce productivity. Like, we know what they're saying, right? Like, and they've been effective at it. And that's why we get to a place today where we can't talk about redistribution because we've been hemmed in to this like limited political imagination of what's even possible. And we don't even have the space to talk about it as legitimate political discourse. You know?
No, I mean, I see the same argument made in terms of, and I was just reading, I'm late to it. It's like 30 years old, but Selling Free Enterprise is the name of the book. So I see the same argument in terms of the history of labor and mass communication. That is kind of like what I was saying, or we need to do certain things to manipulate public opinion away from anti-capitalism or pro-labor, something, you know. And but I haven't seen this argument specific to the two-party system. That's why I'm fascinated by it, but it's clear, and it's all around the same time period.
Yeah,
and it's the same time period where Orasami Burton is in Tip of the Spear writing. I mean, it's the same. They're developing all of these prison-based psychological warfare projects that are meant to be extended into the civilian population with the same purpose of quelling Black and other radical movements. So it's like you see it from in the prisons, you see it from academia, the business community, and I definitely would love to see the argument around the two-party system, because they're all saying the same thing. How do we? We got to stop, because if you have 700 people with what is it with $5 trillion, they got to do all kinds of stuff. To keep people from raising those questions.
Yep. And I'll definitely share that stuff. And I think it's interesting to draw these connections to each other. Like, I think the history, I think there's a certain approach to scholarship, which is map history along a timeline that people don't usually map it along, or something like that. And I think the history of the two-party system is one of those, to look at the ways that they clamp down on alternative political powers at different points, and that they agreed to do it. You know, it was like both parties in power were like, whoa, we don't want these socialists over there doing this thing, or we don't want, sometimes we don't want the radical right either in a previous era. Right now, they're all open to it. But, you know, it was that mapping of how the two-party system evolved at different points in order to narrow the political choices, in order to get us to where we are today, I think is also a history that needs to be told in part of this. And I'll definitely share what I have with you on this.
Yeah, thanks.
And so I want to talk, you talked a little bit about media and how the media is used to shape this narrative. And I want to pivot to that. And I know you've been very active in the space of independent Black media, and I want to talk broadly about that. But first, can you give us a brief update of what's happening with Black Power Media? And then we talked about that a little bit before the show.
Yeah, the short of it is we are developing a new structure, a new leadership, organizational, collective structure. And I think that our initial founding group had some good ideas. I think our hearts and political minds were generally in the right place, but we as a foursome were not prepared to take this project to any next level. So I think it is important just to throw out there that when you're forming anything, a podcast, collective, an organization, it is probably, I think one of the issues that we ran into is we didn't form the structure well enough. I'll just speak for myself. I got excited and just was like, let's form a collective and go, something I've been wanting to do and been working in one way or another to develop for a long time. And for any number of reasons, they just these kinds of efforts don't work. So we sort of rushed into it, and the collective that has emerged has shown us some of our shortcomings, and we've had to, take a couple corrective measures, and we're slowly evolving. So I don't know exactly what's happening in terms of other than we're going to continue, we're going to grow. We have a bunch of great shows that have all continued on, and we are going to, I think, evolve a nice new cooperative, a collective, and be able to build the platform out going forward. So again, I'm not entirely sure. I want to say I think there may be a name change. So first of all, if anybody who watches this is already or wants to be part of the BPM broader collective or audience, stay tuned, because there's going to be a chance to vote on the potential new names or to keep the name. Anyway, there's going to be, I don't know. So now, in other words, I've moved out of the original founding group and into just sort of the broader collective. Now which is, thank God, I wanted to, happily to recede back into a collective. And so the process, so I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but other than a lot of good work coming. So
fair enough. No, I mean, I appreciate that. And, I think sometimes things do better than we think they're going to do, have stresses on them that come as a result of that, and then they reform into something that is new and better. And
exactly.
So that's what it looks like from where I sit, is that there is a necessary rethinking and a necessary reforming of a broader project under, no matter what banner it's under, that is important. And so away from the specifics of that, let's talk generally about the importance of independent Black media, like these networks and this collective that you're working on. Why is it important, and how does it stand to challenge those myths and propaganda that pop up the system?
And the challenge is going to be rough. I mean, because again, and what I've learned, and one of the many things I've learned in this process, we're doing everything exactly wrong for YouTube. YouTube doesn't want collectives. YouTube doesn't want, obviously, unadvertising friendly or non-advertising, advertising unfriendly political content. So algorithmically, politically, we're not, but at the same time, we have evolved a nice audience, and that audience is, I think, to get to the real point of your question, what I think that audience, and what I'll just speak for myself, have wanted to do is to help provide for an audience that already is clear that it knows that it wants and needs something different from the mainstream, and to try to create another public sphere that can give people a chance to debate some ideas and discuss things in ways that they're not discussed elsewhere, and to inform, hopefully, be part of what informs the next wave of militant movements. And but that's really, and the real issue that I see now, I keep using the phrase, I think we're in a civilizational crisis of methodology that I want to help any project that is designed to expose what has been developed to negate the work we're trying to do. So whether it's my students or whether it's people in the broader community, there's an enormous amount of propaganda and narrative shaping and public opinion shaping and other nefarious efforts that make it very difficult for people to understand and interpret what's going on and to get the analysis and the information that they need to inform, again, this movement building. So I think we need more collective efforts and to sustain and support existing collective efforts to try to negate the negation, as my godfather says. So that's really in short, what I think is our mission at this point is to negate the negation. I mean, there's this, it's just so easy at this point to falsely project to a variety of audiences, even symbolically or nominally radical versions of their histories that are just gutted and empty politically. Mm-hmm. And that lead people ultimately back to considering nothing but these two parties that exist. I mean, and then I'll stop here, but between those, that media apparatus, and I know you know a lot more about this than I do, but the billions that are funneled through like Act Blue and other PACs like that. I mean, it's very hard to find. And then, by the way, the buying power argument works the same way, and we see it happening right now. So like outlets like Roland Martin and before all of his latest trouble, Diddy, when he was running Revolt TV, they were all doing the same thing. Why aren't these corporations and the Democratic Party spending more with our outlets during these election seasons? They should be respecting our Black media more. And by that, they mean give us more money to promote your candidates and campaigns. And they do that under the guise of, we're doing this for the people. This is for the community. They don't respect us, Black people, and we're going to make them respect us. And then we're going to bring, when in Roland Martin, he's my favorite to watch do this, but he's like, we're going to bring that McDonald's and Pepsi money to bring you all the political analysis that you need to vote for Joe Biden.
Right.
And so it's not at all, I mean, it's upsetting, but it's not at all confusing as to why so many people feel locked into that. I mean, that's one of the points why I want us to do this alternative media, because where else do people go? They're not encouraged. Where can people go to be encouraged to think differently? If
Exactly. And so Renee and I were talking earlier today about the website for my campaign. And one of the things that we're trying to do with the issues page is lay out issues, but also engage in the kind of political education that allows people to know what's happening and what they can do about it. And we were talking about, I think there's a yearning for a lot of people who know that what they're being sold is in order to benefit the advertisers, in order to benefit the media companies. And I think there's a lot of people who want more in-depth storytelling, more in-depth history, more in-depth argument. And I think we've been all convinced to dumb it down and to make little clips and to make bite-sized versions of everything. And sure enough, that stuff is good. Not everybody wants to listen to you and I talk for an hour and a half, but
it's crazy, right?
Crazy, right? But at the same time, like, I think there has to be these places where the in-depth analysis occurs, right? Like, it's not, the revolution doesn't come by sound bites. The revolution comes by constructive projects that build new institutions for people and have long conversations to work it out and to delve into this. And I thought Finney Taylor did such a good job of sort of explaining this in Elite Capture, where he's talking about the way that a lot of these projects happen are as a result of long, in-depth conversations that are meant to talk about people's material needs. And I think we have to have those kind of spaces. And whether it's on YouTube or not, I always wonder how long how long we can actually do this on YouTube.
No, right.
But you know, I think that the necessity of having this sort of theory and counter theory that just doesn't exist anywhere in the mainstream media, and the closest you get to it is like these sort of mainstream documentaries sometimes that like start to hint at it. And even they all channel people back into the buy more of this and vote for this Democrat. You know,
you have to. That's the only way. You know. By the way, I think you make a great point. That I even asked my brother-in-law to stop sending me these TikToks because I was getting into my, I don't know, my bougie academic feelings, because I'm saying, you know, you're sending me these cute videos that are 90 seconds to 3 minutes on topics that I and people I know have been studying intently for decades. And part of my problem is they are catchy. They do, and sometimes even a pretty good job of summarizing some points. But if you don't get the long form analysis, if you don't already have a certain political frame, the implicit messaging ultimately often is you just have to vote for the lesser of evils, and that's usually a Democrat. Because at the end of the day, when people are either asked directly or thinking even unconsciously, well, what is it I'm supposed to do about this? Now that I've seen this stylish TikTok that exposed the whatever, what do I do with that? And then if they don't have the long form, if they don't already have a politically educated frame of reference, if they're not involved in this, that, or the other sort of alternative work or study, the Act Blues, the general wave of funding, the Democratic Party, the messaging, all of it just quietly takes hold. And then or even worse, some of our formerly great academics and activists become publicly and aggressively hostile to people who are even raising questions about some alternative or leftward movement or Dem exit, as Renee was saying at one point. You know, like my point being that people have really ultimately, I can see how they feel they have no choice but to go back either to a non-vote at all or to the lesser of evil.
And look, sometimes the lesser of evil, like I am not voting for any Democrat anytime soon, but I appreciate people who feel that that is the best choice they have because the alternative is not yet developed. And like that there's a real material need in the meantime between now and whatever future we're trying to build, in which they feel that. I don't begrudge folks who feel that way at all. And I think part of the difficult work is accepting that they feel that way and that they have genuine reasons to feel that way. I mean, one of the things that I think has been most interesting in watching the Democrats respond to the uncommitted voters, and these are folks in their own party who are like, hey, we're not so comfortable with the genocide. And they're like, well, get over it. You know, like we've got work to do. And it's like that lack
You mean the work of stopping genocide? Like what work are we
yeah. Right. And it's like, you know, I saw somebody the other day, like, what could Biden do? What could he do to win these votes? And I'm like, well, he could not condemn the ICC. He could not welcome Netanyahu to come to DC. Like, he doesn't even have to do anything.
That's a good point.
To like, he could say the right words, right? Like he could
do less by not hosting someone. You're doing less. You don't have to show up and shake his hand. Just
right. Like, no, sorry, we won't let him in the country. You know, and it just, I think there's this degree to which there's such a cognitive dissonance about trying to explain away genocide that they just don't believe that people genuinely feel that. They think that those people are running some game on them or something. And I think people are like genuinely like, hey, I don't like the genocide. And the inability to have the argumentative empathy to believe that people genuinely believe that, I think is really telling of this place where we have gotten to in the politics, because it's like, it's not my party that believes that. It's 54% of people in the Democratic Party who believe that. right? There's a poll that I keep sharing that is like 50% of people who voted for Joe Biden in 2020 think this is a genocide. And it's like, we're not talking about, radical elements here. We're talking about people who voted for Joe Biden, And,
right. And even they can see what it is.
Yeah. And I think the importance of having these alternative media spaces is that, like, this conversation isn't occurring anywhere outside of short form social media. This conversation is occurring on your network, on my network, on some other alternative places, but it's not occurring on Roland Martin. It's not occurring on CNN. It's not occurring in most of these spaces. And if it did, it would be, I can't even imagine what it would look like.
No, the phrase from one of my favorite former scholars who I've known for decades, who's I think now captured by Roland Martin and his presence on that platform, is used the phrase weaponized ignorance this week on Twitter in response to people expressing even the slightest bit of agreement with Cardi B when she said, I don't think I can vote for either one of these presidents because one is fascism and the other is genocide. So even she's saying that. And then the response to people who are just even saying, hey, she might have a point. You get these, again, pundits and others who whether, I don't know whether there are direct payments or just algorithmic and societal benefit, or maybe they really believe it. Although I don't know. I don't even know. The response though is instead of even engaging and saying, okay, I might not agree with you, but let's talk about, because I think to your point, I'm not mad at people who feel like they have to make certain decisions, but it's the aggressive hostility to those who raise critique or who say they want to do something else, that bothers me more than anything. If you really feel like, and particularly if you're a pundit or an educator or a broadcaster, I think there are ways for you to say, look, I have to vote for Biden and I'm advocating we vote for Biden. But here are some histories, logical reasons for why others are advocating some other leftward move. Let's look at their argument, talk about it, and then I'll still disagree with it and vote for Biden. I think I would actually have almost not no problem with that, but I would have far less a problem with that than this vitriol that is thrown at people, all meant to blunt and suppress that logic. That's what bothers me the most about all of this, and why these spaces, I think, to your point, are absolutely necessary.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, it's like Joe Biden has made a campaign slogan out of lesser evilism. Like, he's literally saying, don't compare me to the almighty, compare me to the other guy. And it is like they need to force this two choices in order for them.
I didn't hear that line. That's his line?
That was his line last time around, and he says it this time, and it is like,
the only thing I remember last time was, I'm just not him.
Yeah, right? Like that's the strategy. And it is like, it works on a lot of things. Like, let's be clear. Like, Joe Biden is better on a lot of things than Donald Trump. And I can understand if you're a trans person, or if you're, if you rely on, I don't know. I think there's a few categories of people for whom it really is clear that Joe Biden is absolutely going to be better than Donald Trump. And then on a whole bunch of things, it's a wash, I think. But it's like, if the comparison and the forced choice is you have to choose one of these two folks, well, then it's easy enough to say, look, the genocide thing, that's a wash. But let's go on and talk about other stuff. And it's like, that's the argumentative move that's happening right now. It's like, look, we know this. We know this genocide thing is bad, but let's talk about other stuff. And it's like, this is exposing the limits of the lesser evilism arguments, I think. And I think people are mad about it because they don't actually have an argument, right? Like, whether they believe it's a genocide or not, some of that is semantics. It's political semantics, but some of that is semantics. I think most people can look and say, God, this is not okay. And
But you're right. If the argument is, well, the other guy's going to do it too, so we might as well focus on the handfuls of issues where there's difference. That's slick.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're right. Yeah.
That move has worked for a host of issues, to accept the critique and then say, but here's where he's better. But when the critique you're accepting is he is supporting genocide, you start to test the credulity of that argument, I think. And I think a lot of people, like Cardi B, are seeing it this time. And oh, we lost Jared there for a second. There we go. There we go.
Not touching anything. I don't know what's going on.
StreamYard being StreamYard, right? Anyway, I want to turn. Thank you to StreamYard for getting me off of this topic and allowing me to pivot to the next one. So I want to turn to campus labor organizing. You mentioned earlier, and as we were talking about the myth of Black buying power, the sort of way that labor has interacted with this. And I know that you've been involved in some of these struggles at a very local level. And I know you've advocated for the rights of workers to unionize on your campus and across the University of Maryland system. Can you talk a little bit about that struggle broadly, and then how it plays out at Morgan?
Well, I mean, I know, a lot of times for those not in the academic community, there's that the idea that the ivory tower existence is for there's an idea that campuses and faculty and students are living a privileged existence completely divorced from the rest of the world. And yes, it is a privileged existence, but it's absolutely not divorced from the rest of the world. And I've just been watching. I mean, there's hundreds, and ultimately at this point, well, there's a couple thousand now, students and faculty who have suffered some form of sanction, arrest, removal, even tenured faculty, which I admit, got my eyebrows up. It's like even tenured faculty are finding their positions being taken because they stood up for Palestinian, just to say stop the genocide. It's not even. That's really basically it. It's not. They're not advocating really anything beyond that, and maybe divest. But it's not. Anyway, it's not some Palestinian supremacy and eradication of his, it's nothing. It's just, hey, could you just stop the genocide? No, you're fired.
Stop using our university's money in order to support this genocide. And it is like, you're done.
You're done. That's it. And so beyond that, I mean, even before October 7th, I mean, the whether it was COVID or even before COVID, just the general increasing corporate involvement and military involvement in campuses, the shift, particularly at HBCUs, away from liberal arts to STEM and to cybersecurity and engineering and military defense, and I think all with a similar goal of reducing the likelihood of radical ideas being studied and developed. In other words, there's already a massive problem with so-called higher education. Then you add the politics of settler colonialism and a defense for Zionism, and in particular, a condemnation of an armed uprising by Hamas, and you get what we get. And I think I will admit a degree of surprise both at the levels of student resistance and encampments, positive surprise, and I'll admit a little bit of a surprise in the aggressiveness that institutions are bringing against their faculty and administration. I admit I was probably, I guess, some residual naivete hanging around, or, I a little surprised, not so much as the elite firings of presidents for maybe so much, or stepping, but the sort of broader repression not just overtly leftist faculty either. I mean, there's relatively mainstream conservative, even not, well, by my standards, faculty that have suffered all kinds of things. So yeah, that's and then what I've seen on my campus at Morgan is the president taking a very aggressive public stance against even the potential for students to engage in protest. Almost draconian statements about where you can protest, what you can do at a protest, what you can say, what cannot be said, what would happen if you do, what could potentially happen to students in terms of sanctions, removal, withholding grades and transcripts, all kinds of stuff. All while we're watching an evolution of a cop city in Baltimore, of the 1033
at an HBCU,
at Coppin, exactly. Yeah. With the sort of a militarization of Morgan in ways through the 1033 program and expansion of the police and private security and allied industries at that, which has a notorious, as I'm quickly learning, reputation around the country as one of the biggest employers in the country, with a whole just endless amount of issues and concerns raised about their behavior, and as was raised on our campus this past semester, almost somewhat virally, with one woman's TikTok being distributed all over the place, calling out security, allied industry security for harassment, and I don't know if it went quote unquote beyond that, but that's bad enough. Yeah, I mean, and then I even, in a sort of unofficial project with a colleague of mine at Bowie State, we sort of polled our students as part of the final project this semester, asking them why they think there haven't been more aggressive involvement in pro-Palestinian protests or encampments. And the responses, I think, have been fascinating, but all of them, not all of them, many of them revolve around the fear of reprisal, repression, and a sense of sort of powerlessness vis-a-vis the university and maybe their lives in general. Many of them express a sort of, we don't have the privilege that you see on other campuses. I can't take this chance. So I don't know if I lost, again, the plot of your initial question, but that's at least some of what I see happening and in what context I see it.
And all of that is happening against a background in which you don't have the ability to unionize as faculty, right?
Exactly. Thank you. Yes.
And so, I know I talked to Andrew Eneim about the effort at Hopkins, and I know Hopkins' collective bargaining agreement actually has lines in it that prohibit the police from the kind of crackdown that we've seen at some places. And I think we've seen union activity in other places. Like, I think when it's one thing to see police beating professors and beating staff and graduate students, it's another thing when they're a member of United Electrical Workers or they're a member of UAW and the union comes back and says, oh no, you're not going to do that. And I know that in Maryland, the state colleges, including the HBCUs, have been fighting for a long time in order to get that collective bargaining. But without it, it feels like you're very vulnerable in a sense if you do stand up to any of this. Do you how is that effort moving at all? I know Maryland has this thing where it makes public service employees go beg Annapolis in order to be able to unionize one at a time. And I know the community colleges got it, and but I know the rest of the schools are still working for it.
Yeah, and I'm certainly not in the leadership of this, so I don't want to. We probably have to get some of the more the experts around Maryland's American Association of University Professors organization and the teachers union, that they're connected to. But from what I've seen, I mean, the bills keep getting rejected. the Maryland state legislature particularly the Senate keeps saying no. And I won't, I don't have a lot of experience with this, so this is somewhat fresh for me, but Representative Hershey, in one of the hearings I was at this past couple months ago, said his argument was, you're not coal miners, you're university faculty. What do you need unions for? What do you need labor protection for? You're not. And this, by the way, this is right after a graduate student had confessed to how do you put this on YouTube? To engage in self-harm at the stress and the disrespect he had received as a grad student. And right after that, here comes Hershey saying, you're not coal mine. Right. So therefore, I guess we deserve to have no rights and to be exploited, I guess is the point. But yeah, and I do like to, when given a chance, to point out that Morgan State has a very specific relationship. It's not in the University of Maryland system, and it has its own hierarchy that runs through the board of directors up to the state's attorney general. And what I've learned through my own struggles is that it gives them, within certain segments of the Black community, the idea is it has this beautiful level of autonomy, but that also means there's no oversight, and it can get away with basically whatever it wants. And when it comes to faculty rights, governance, etc., I won't even bore you and your audience with one of our last faculty meetings, but it's looking bad for liberal arts. It's looking bad for critical thinking and the idea that we're going to be training, as Morgan's mission says, future local Black leaders. We're supposed to be training the teachers and as one person pointed out, the preachers, forgive my atheism on that one, but whoever, we're supposed to be training them. And if all we're doing is throwing them through a pipeline that's funded by Boeing and Lockheed Martin and Homeland Security, so.
Yeah, no, yeah. I had Devarian Baldwin on to talk about In the Shadow of the Ivory Tower, and to talk about this way that the universities are becoming these money laundering tools for these big corporations. And I think it's interesting to think about the way that also happens at the HBCUs, especially one like Morgan, that is a prominent, preeminent HBCU that does get that same investment from the weapons makers and from the finance that some of the other universities may love to have, but they don't have anything like that. But Morgan is that, one of those HBCUs that does have those type of connections. And I think in the larger conversation about higher ed, I think we need to figure out how to extend the faculty protections in order to stop the university from becoming a hedge fund with the schoolhouse attached to it, and we need to use the leverage that the state has in order, it's ridiculous that that these state institutions, that the state has no leverage over them and does not see a big university funded by weapons makers sitting on a bunch of tax-free property as a policy problem, and instead sees it as a thing to be controlled or something like that, And it's I think the point that Hershey makes is interesting, because it says both what he thinks about higher ed and what he thinks about organized labor, right?
Yeah.
It's and I think that position is easy enough for folks to take. But I thought, when Andrew Eneim came on and talked about the way that Hopkins grad students run the science machine, right?
Yeah.
They are there to run the science machine on the cheap, so that the corporations can take the patents and the tax breaks, and everybody can make off with a ton of money.
That is, unfortunately, when the dean that I ran into all kinds of trouble with, which is why I'm no longer in the School of Communication, when he first came in 2013, the first thing he did was hand us an article about the teaching hospital model. And he said, this is going to be the basis for our School of Communication. And basically what that meant was that the pharmaceutical companies, the medical industrial equipment producers and manufacturers determine what those hospitals teach. They determine the content in the curricula. And with the idea, if you want our money, if you want our equipment, and his argument was that we're going to have the same relationship to the commercial mainstream media environment. And for all of you who do critical communications, study, or he literally, he said, if I can't fire you, I'll make you want to quit. And he kept his word. He kept his word.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the context at which I think it's important to understand the labor struggles within campuses is look, we need to keep these institutions as institutions that are generative and constructive and can produce critical thought in a world in which none of it happens. And there's plenty of people who would love to see them go in the other direction. One thing I've been thinking about is what if instead of making each public service sector union come beg the General Assembly for a decade, what if we just said, hey, all public service workers can collectively bargain? I think there's a lot of unions that would be upset with that too, because they like playing this game where they go to Annapolis and advocate, where everybody likes the game as it is right now, except the workers and the students.
So let me, because I know our time is a little bit short. I don't know if we have time for this, but let me ask you this way, because now I want to ask you. So when we get you elected in 2026, what do you already know? I'm not even aware to what extent the governor can do what, in to be honest. So are you already studying these? Are these things that you would run on and would be looking to enact? And can the governor say that in Maryland? Can the governor, to what extent?
So look, I think this is a good question. There's a couple things here that I would say. First of all, there's a lot of things that the governor can do by executive power, right? That's why Hogan was able to have some power when he was governor, because there's a lot of things that can happen by executive power. So that's one part of it. The second part of it is, if and when I get elected, it will be because there has come a coalition of people together that was able to have enough votes, right? Sometimes I think we think about these scenarios in which a third party person gets elected as if they were going to get elected with 1 or 2% support in the votes, and then it would be hard to govern at that point. But it's if I get elected, it's because a massive shift has happened in Maryland around issues that I'm running on and based on coalitions. And the General Assembly can make their choices about how they respond to that. But I would introduce, for example, a piece of legislation that allowed all state bargaining or all state employees to have collective bargaining instead of making them come at it individually. Now, surely there's policy people on your campus and all sorts of campuses that would tell me how this has to get implemented. But I think that a world in which a Maryland that elects a green governor talking about redistribution is a Maryland in which there are plenty of people who support that. They would have had to vote for it. And those people live in districts where people are running for city council, and those people live in districts where people are running for state delegate and state senator. And I think one of the things that happens right now is that these nonprofits and unions and other advocacy organizations serve as an intermediary between people and government. And they do a pretty good job in that of filtering everybody into slow Democrat solutions that they can all work together on. That arrangement is going to be completely different in a world in which I get elected. And so they're going to resist, right? It's not like people are going to say, oh, you're here now. We love it. Let's do all this stuff. But there's going to be a real political pressure based on what happens in that will make the choice about collective bargaining. If I run on collective bargaining and and people who want to be in unions are supporting me, they might elect some delegates, they might elect some senators, but if they don't, and I bring that bill to the General Assembly, we're not bringing folks on buses that the union provides. We're bringing all sorts of folks down to Annapolis outside of those advocacy organizations to put pressure to get this stuff done. So, I mean, I think governing is going to be hard in that world, but I think we need to assume the political shift that has happened by the time we get there. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's like, I think oftentimes these scenarios are like, some glitch is going to happen and a third party is going to get elected, and it won't make any sense. And it's like, if that glitch has 40% of Marylanders in the gubernatorial election vote for somebody that's talking about redistribution, talking about blanket unionization, that pressure exists outside of that one election. Does that make sense?
No, I think so. Yeah. I mean, again, I'm just very late and behind and trying to learn about some of the details of how, in many cases, more local politics work, but and what can be done through them. But I am fascinated at, sort of how your campaign could be, and I'm sure you already started doing it, which first of all, which I think is dope that you started this early. I think that's huge.
Yeah, thank you.
That it can be a teaching tool as to what is the potential of electoral politics if we stop thinking of it as we're encouraged and almost forced to think about it. Mm-hmm. So that's but yeah, it would be great if so again, if a governor could, through executive order, just initiate blanket unionization.
No, I think it would take legislation.
Okay.
So I think it would take, like the way that it is written into law right now is basically each state worker group has to appeal separately to Annapolis for that. And so that's why you have the librarians and the community colleges and the state college workers all sort of going at it at different angles, right? And those things pit them against each other because the General Assembly will only allow like one of those to happen at a time. Those support the unions that are funneling their donations through Act Blue. You know, there's an industry of folks that mediate what is possible in Annapolis. And they are excellent gatekeepers. They're excellent conduits of power. And I think we need to figure out how to go around them. And I think we need to figure out how to get people who are channeling their efforts through grassroots struggles to talk to their own legislators instead of talking to this sort of nonprofit industrial advocacy class or complex or whatever it is that mediates all these things. And so I think what you get a lot of times with that is, well, we're going to run the bill this year and we don't think it'll pass, but we're going to take pictures of everybody that we bust down there so that we can fundraise off of it. And the next year we'll try again and we'll try a little bit better. And then a decade later, you finally get collective bargaining on, say, community college campuses. And by that time, like now, you know, you spent a decade trying to do it, tons of resources trying to do it. And people are not typically that empowered through these processes. Organizations that can mobilize people are, but not organizations that can organize people, you know? And so I think we need to start thinking about what it means to advocate in Annapolis outside of the paid lobbyist of the union or the paid lobbyist of the organizations that do it now, who deal with access, not with power.
Oh man. Yeah. No, that makes sense. That actually explains a lot of why I think we see what we end up seeing.
Yep.
Yeah.
I appreciate the diversion there, and it's a good question, and it's one I definitely want to talk about more. And I definitely want to talk about electoral politics more. I do think we're getting to a time where we probably should end this, but let's do it again for sure. I'd love to continue having these conversations with you.
No, absolutely. I appreciate it, and I enjoyed the learning from watching your conversations over the last, well, for me, I think it's only been a few months. I'm still catching up, but very informative, and look forward to following the campaign. I definitely want to talk more about it because I'm still trying to figure out how to be effective in this work myself. So
yeah, no, totally. And I mean, I have a lot of ideas and I'm doing a lot of learning, but I also want to, community of practice where we can talk about these things, where we can shape these ideas, where we can have the long form conversations that challenge the binaries of, of the two-party system gives us, that challenges the myths and propagandas of buying power and the other myth and propaganda that we're with. I think it comes down through conversation, and I think it's not conversation alone, but I think conversations like this help to spark ideas in people, help to give a different sense of what's possible, and help to give a different sense of what is, right? Like, I think it's the work that you're doing in the media network and the work you do in the book, I think begins to negate the negation, as you say, in a way that we just need more of that. We need more of these conversations about what's possible and why we can't get it.
Can't say it better myself. That's great. Thank you very much for having me on. I look forward to much more.
Yeah. And one last time, how do people get in touch with you or follow your work?
imixwhatilike.org, at imixwhatilike is the best way just to follow what I'm doing and what my colleagues and comrades are doing. And currently still with Black Power Media. So check that out. And once you subscribe, even if there is a voted name change, your subscription will carry over.
All right. Well, we thank YouTube for that one, right?
Yeah, right on. Yeah.
Of all the things we can thank YouTube for, it's that one. So thank you so much, Dr. Jared Ball. It's been a great opportunity to have this conversation with you, and I hope it's one of many that we have over the
likewise
couple of months.
No, right on. Appreciate you, and peace to you and your audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. Well, this was an excellent episode. I really enjoyed the opportunity to talk to Dr. Jared Ball of Morgan State University. Conversation is great. Check him out over at IMIX What I Like, and see if you can plug into some of the excellent work that he's doing. Next week, we have Dr. Nicole Fabricant of Towson University, and we're going to talk about her book, Fighting to Breathe, and the struggle for environmental justice and student activism in South Baltimore. So thank you very much for an excellent show, and I will talk to you again soon.